Hi, Max here. I'm a student worker at ResLife. One of our goals this year is to improve our transparency, and in line with that, today I'll be going over our finances. I made this little pie chart here to help explain where our funding goes to. But the first thing I want to communicate is that our department is what's known as a cost center. It essentially means that we're financially independent from the rest of UVM and operate similarly to a nonprofit. We receive no funding from the university, and all of our earnings go directly towards UVM's halls and residential experience in one way or another. This past fiscal year, we made roughly $50 million in revenue. Let me break down where that money's going. So roughly 10% goes towards salaries for our 90 staff members. This is people like office managers, program directors, our customer care team, basically everyone who works in or around the halls. The small sliver here is for benefits like medical insurance and vision and dental. We have a small one next to that, which is for graduate student workers, and one next to that, which is for student and temp workers. I'm part of this group, actually, but so would be anyone who works at a front desk or in a residence hall who's a student. So we have $1.8 million set aside for resident assistance. This isn't a salary or a wage, but it's the cost of the room and board being provided as compensation for their work. Overall, this first chunk here is about 15% of the overall budget, and it's everything that we spend on our staff. This next big segment is all of the utilities costs, things that we have to spend each year on upkeep in the halls. And it's a little bit over half of our revenue. And that includes, network services, heat, electricity, all of the utilities associated with keeping these halls up and running. I'm going to briefly mention these again later. This next thing, the biggest individual expense each year, is labeled as debt, but it would be more accurate to say that it's the ongoing process of paying off our large-scale construction projects each year. CCRH and U-Heights primarily make up this segment as the most recently constructed halls. With all of these things combined, this adds up to around 94.8% of our total revenue each year going towards these existing mandatory expenses, and it leaves us with roughly $2.5 million left over. This is what's known as discretionary funding. It's all of the money that we actually have full control over what we do with each year. But even within this sliver, a large portion of this is going to be going towards our reserves, which I'll also talk about later. But whatever else we have left over from that is going to go towards things like events, student merchandise, and student-facing projects like displays and visual upgrades, like the new complex signs that we just put up. For the sake of simplicity, I also broke this down into the cost for each individual student. This is how much you'd be paying a year for each of these things. You'd be giving us roughly $8,566. That's the average cost per student. And around 1,000 of that would go towards all of the wages and salaries for all of the staff, including student workers. And because I'm in this, I actually did the math. You'd be paying me around 25 cents. So thank you for that. This is how much money you would be spending on utilities per year. Keep in mind that the cleaner you keep your halls, the less we have to spend on custodial. So if halls are more or less clean year by year, we end up having more of this discretionary money to spend towards renovations. So per student, we'd end up with around $400 left over, and we have to allocate a certain amount of that to our reserves, but we try to spend as much of it as we can to improve the student experience through giving away merchandise or through upgrading the halls. I've mentioned these reserves a couple times before, but what are they? Essentially, as a department, we are required to keep a certain amount of money in our account in case of emergencies, like if a hall were to flood and we needed to compensate students for their lost belongings. This reserve account is also required for our bonds and for helping pay off our construction projects. So of that discretionary funding that we have to spend, how are we using it? Here I have an old 10-year maintenance plan from 2022 just as an example. We have a new one that's being published internally in a week or two, but it's constantly being updated, and just for the sake of giving a few examples, I'm using this old one. Even this one, though, which has around half of the amount of projects that the current one that we're working on has, you can still see that a large portion of that discretionary funding is going towards upgrades. A few ones that I'd like to point out that we did this year in addition to these ones that are planned is CWP's new flooring and MAT's awning replacement. But just looking at this old one, you can still see that we have a lot that we're doing each year, such as Harris Millis Dining is getting a whole renovation next summer, and all of the cottages on Trinity campus are getting new roofs. And like I mentioned, these projects are taking up a good amount of that discretionary funding, and even year by year dipping into our reserves a little bit. But in short, what I'm trying to get across with this is that we are completely financially independent from UVM as a broader institution, and 100% of our budget is going towards maintaining and improving the halls. Whatever money that we're making that isn't going towards maintaining things the way that they are is going towards upgrading and repairing our facilities and giving you all the best housing experience possible. I know this video has been a lot of numbers and probably pretty boring, so as a thanks for getting through the whole video, here is a GIF of a skeleton dancing. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.